And I hope we have once again reminded people that man is not free unless government is limited. There's a clear cause and effect here that is as neat and predictable as a law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts.
From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
It can't be. Friday already? It is, in fact, Friday, the 9th day of February, 2024. You're back in the Liberty Podcast studio, right here in the beautiful Sand Hills beneath the pines. And a little public service announcement for you today. We'll get to that a little later. Just remember, purple for the people. Hey, Super Bowl weekend coming up, or as Joe Biden likes to call it, the AFL-NFL Championship. And he's excited to know that the Kansas City Chiefs are playing the San Francisco 49ers. He's particularly hoping that Hank Stram and the Chiefs and their capable quarterback Len Dawson will put on a good show against the mighty 49ers, who play their games at Candlestick Park, or is it Kaiser Field? And their super hurler play caller, John Brody, the great quarterback for the Niners. Old Joe is hoping that it's a real humdinger of a game, and he can't wait for the IBM Selectric sponsored halftime show and another stunning performance by Michael Jackson, the great pop artist. He's looking forward to that. As well as upcoming shows on television that he really likes, like All in the Family and The Jeffersons. Yes, those are coming up too in Biden world. But seriously, folks, we discovered on February the 8th, thanks to a special counsel report out of the Department of Justice, that the President of the United States is in worse shape than we knew mentally, cognitively, as we like to say. And I think that the special counselor, whose name is her, not a pronoun, no, it's H-U-R, counselor her, him, her, not Ben-Hur. He lays it out pretty plainly for us in describing, why they can't possibly charge Joe Biden with mishandling classified documents, because he's such a doddering old man that it would be unfair to put him on trial, even if they wanted to. But they don't, because he's not Donald Trump. Hey, I've got a couple of quick things to bring to your attention today, because, we're paying attention all the time for things you need to know to stay informed and to remain properly cynical. Here's something I recommend. It's a new book that just came to my doorstep, The Indoctrinated Brain. It's by a German author named Michael Nehls. And let me just share with you what the gist of this book is and why it's important that you read it. He's a medical doctor, an internationally renowned molecular geneticist. And in his book, he lays out a shattering chain of circumstantial evidence indicating that behind numerous negative influences in the world lies a targeted, masterfully executed attack on our individuality. He points out how the raging wars against the viruses, about climate change, or over our national borders are more likely intended than not, and that they're fundamentally providing the platform for such an offensive against the human brain that it is steadily changing our being and is aimed at depriving us of our ability to think for ourselves. I'm telling you, I've read a couple of chapters of this book, and it shows you, it lays out for you that the Chinese bioweapon, the pandemic of the past several years, was not a one and done event. It was the beginning of a long game, ladies and gentlemen. Hey, you probably got this in the mail in the last couple of days from the North Carolina Board of Elections, State Board of Elections. And what it tells you is, if you look at it real close, is that you need to bring your photo ID to the polls when you vote this year. And you're saying, well, that's way down the road in the fall. Oh, no. Early voting begins next week on February 15, which is a Thursday, and it runs all the way until March the 2nd at 2 locations. You'll be voting in the primaries for lieutenant governor, all these various races on the Council of State, and of course the local school board races are in play. You're going to want to be involved, and don't forget to bring that ID. But wait a minute, you say, what if I'm a complete loser or a Democrat and I don't have me an ID? What does that mean? I can't vote? Does that mean I'll be denied my right as a citizen? Don't worry, folks. They've got you covered. Here in the fine print, I'm not making this up. Voters who do not have photo ID when they vote can make sure their vote counts by filling out a form explaining why they are unable to show ID. Let me read that again. By filling out a form explaining why they are unable to show an ID. Does that mean you lost it? Does that mean you never had one? What does that mean? And who are you? If you can fill this out without an ID, then you're essentially voting without a photo ID. So we're back to square one, it seems to me. It'll be interesting to see how many of these forms they collect and from whom, and what kind of excuses they come up with. It will be, I think, a good overview of the loss of accountability that plagues our culture in every aspect of life in this great, great land of ours. Now, I wanted to also bring to your attention a quick item or two before we get to the things that are on our minds today, which of course is Tucker Carlson's interview with the evil Vladimir Putin, which he aired yesterday on various platforms from his February 6th interview in Moscow with the longtime leader of the former Soviet Union. And then also on our minds, of course, is the big report that was released by the special counsel explaining why Joe Biden is even more senile than we knew. But this is a story that came up on my radar this week that also really needs to be on your radar. The Federal Reserve recently disclosed its preliminary income and expenses for 2023, revealing an unprecedented, wait for this, $114.3 billion in operational losses. Somewhat surprisingly, Fed officials seem unconcerned about this financial performance. Now, why does this matter? That they're $114.3 billion in the hole operationally as the Federal Reserve. Remember this, points out the author. One key aspect of the Federal Reserve Act is its obligation to remit its profits to the U.S. Treasury. Profits. Except in 2023, they don't have any profits. So what happens? When the Fed experiences losses, however, it doesn't lead to the Treasury cutting a check. Oh no, instead the Fed issues an IOU known as deferred assets, essentially monetizing its own deficits. Okay, what are we dealing with here? Other than another example of why financial collapse is in our future. The Fed, in its quest to address its deficits, is not only indirectly imposing an inflation tax through fiscal policy, but is also normalizing a potentially hazardous misapplication of its authority to use currency. This is a very slippery slope that typically does not end well. Concludes the author, the Federal Reserve finds itself in new territory, grappling with substantial deficits for the first time in its history. Another first for the Biden era. How about that? They just keep coming like greatest hits. They never stop. Okay, let's talk for a minute about the Tucker Carlson interview, which is on his new streaming network, TCN, Tucker Carlson Network. You can also find it on X, formerly known as Twitter, which I think we ought to just go back to calling it Twitter. What does X mean? It means 10. But that Super Bowl was played like, I don't know, 48 years ago or something. So forget it. And also other platforms you may be familiar with, Rumble and Getter. You'll probably be able to see, if not the whole interview, which is over 2 hours. He's going to call his show 120 minutes as opposed to 60 minutes, I guess. But Rumble and Getter will also lead you to snippets and excerpts from the interview with Vlad the Impaler, who at one point Vladimir sort of affectionately calls him Mr. Tucker, which I thought was, I'm glad he didn't get his letters mixed up there when enunciating Tucker, considering what he may have been thinking of him. But I just want to point out to you all who may never get around to watching it, as interesting as his rationale for the invasion of Ukraine and for sort of pointing out the folly of the United States in trying to get involved in it, which we clearly have gotten way too involved in the opinion of many clear thinkers. As interesting as that is his whole discussion of the shift in the world reserve currency from being dominated by the U.S. dollar, and he talks about how they're now doing a lot of their international trade in rubles and the yuan, which is China's currency. And he talks extensively about the Nord Stream pipeline that was clearly sabotaged and blown up in the bottom of the Baltic Sea. He talks a lot about his working knowledge of the American system of governance, and points out our $34 trillion in debt, and speaks with some degree of curiosity about why we have all these individual states' rights and how inefficient that seems to him, of course, as a complete autocrat. But nonetheless, it's worth watching, and I would say it's probably going to be one of these things you're going to have to go back and watch 2 or 3 times in order to extract the real jewels in there. But to his credit, Carlson airs the interview in its entirety. Not a lot of crafty editing and dicing and slicing as our mainstream networks like to do all the time, especially when they're trying to make someone look bad, which is kind of what they're in the business of doing. Now, I want to also talk to you about the report that came out this week from the special counsel to submitted ostensibly to the Attorney General, Merrick Garland. And he gives Christmas decorations a bad rap, Garland. The counselor who crafted the report is Robert K. Hur, H-U-S, Hur. It's 350 plus pages, but you don't need to read them all. You need the 14-page executive summary. You read this thing, you got it covered. And this is where the good stuff is. In addition to, of course, detailing how Biden had classified documents all over the place, really. I mean, unlike Trump, who had them in like one room in his home in Mar-a-Lago, this document talks about, a basement den in one location, a garage, an office in another location. I mean, documents were everywhere, and they weren't just printed classified documents, with the stamp on them, eyes only. They were a lot of notes that he took by hand laying around that were, notes detailing very specific things that are classified and sensitive. it was particularly interesting that he took this little detour in the report fairly early on to write as follows. He used these classified materials, meaning Biden, to write memoirs published in 2007 and 17 to document his legacy and to cite as evidence that he was a man of presidential timber. In 2009, then Vice President Biden strongly opposed the military's plan to send more troops to Afghanistan. Now, you kind of remember that, but apparently Biden was really in Obama's face about it. He labored to dissuade Obama from escalating America's involvement there and repeating what Mr. Biden believed was a mistake akin to Vietnam. Despite Mr. Biden's advice, President Obama ordered a surge of additional U.S. troops, and Mr. Biden's views endured sharp criticism from others within and out of the administration. But he always believed history would prove him right. So this is interesting because now this may give us further insight into what led Biden to maniacally and recklessly pull all U.S. troop divisions out of Afghanistan so abruptly at the outset of his presidency, leaving like $80 billion of military equipment on the ground at the Bagram Air Force Base. Maybe now we know he was settling the score from all those years ago. But that's one little snippet of this very interesting report. The materials also included notebooks in unsecured and unauthorized spaces at his Virginia and Delaware homes. And some of the notebooks were used as reference materials for his second memoir and were shared openly with this now disclosed ghostwriter. Well, of course he had a ghostwriter. He was never going to write this stuff himself. These documents from fall 2009 have classifications markings up to top secret, sensitive, compartmented information. They were found in a box in Mr. Biden's Delaware garage that contained other materials of great personal significance to him and that he appears to have personally used and accessed. This stuff goes on and on and on. Nevertheless, we do not believe this evidence is sufficient, meaning the evidence that he improperly held on to these documents. And here's why they don't think it's sufficient. It's not because, well, he's not Donald Trump. The report says this evidence is not sufficient because, as jurors would likely find reasonable doubt for one or more of several reasons. Both when he served as vice president and when the Afghanistan documents were found in Mr. Biden's Delaware garage, his possession of them in his Delaware home was not a basis for prosecution because as vice president and president, he had authority to keep classified documents in his home. The best case for charges would rely on Mr. Biden's possession of the Afghanistan documents in his Virginia home in February 2017 when he was a private citizen and when his ghostwriter had just found the classified material. They go on to sort of defend him as saying that finding classified documents at his home less than a month after leaving office could have been an unremarkable and forgettable event. And the place where the Afghan documents were eventually found in Mr. Biden's Delaware garage in a badly damaged box surrounded by household items suggests the documents might have been forgotten. Well, so what? So what? That's like saying, oh, I didn't pay my taxes 10 years ago, and then I forgot that I didn't pay them. So, whatever, right? Same thing. Unbelievable. Another viable defense is that Mr. Biden might not have retained the classified Afghanistan documents in his Virginia home at all. They could have been stored by mistake and without his knowledge. And here's where we start getting into the big bullet points that have made national and international headlines. Given Mr. Biden's limited precision and recall, meaning memory, during his interviews with his ghostwriter and with our office, jurors may hesitate to place too much evidentiary weight on a single 8-word utterance to his ghostwriter about finding classified documents in his Virginia home in the absence of other more direct evidence. We searched for such evidence and found it wanting. In other words, they're giving him a free pass here. Here's the killer for Biden's future as president and candidate for re-election. We have also considered that at trial, Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury, as he did during our interview of him, as a sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory. It would be difficult to convince a jury that they should convict him, by then a former president well into his 80s, of a serious felony that requires a mental state of willfulness. So in other words, he'd be way too old in the future if he was interviewed and charged with this post-presidency. And he's not in very good shape right now based on their experiences with him in the recent interviews that led to the generation of this report. Anyway, it's, as I said, it's about 14 pages. It makes some other very interesting historical references. I would suggest finding it online and reading the 14 pages, and you'll have a good feel for the essence of what they found and why they're not going to, make a big fuss over the improper handling of classified documents, and also sharing them openly with some as of yet unidentified ghostwriter. I'm sure that person's identity will soon come to the fore, as we like to say, folks. Hey, there was a disjointed letter to the editor in the pilot in the past week, in which the writer said she couldn't wait for a day to arrive when our current school board members would be replaced via election this fall to get us back on track, focusing on the kids and focusing on the children and the students and the teachers and the administrators, because they're all so great and they're beyond any kind of criticism. But I just want to remind you that the Moore County GOP has deliberately endorsed a novice, unqualified candidate for school board over the sitting candidate and incumbent, David Hensley. There he is, Hensley, purple for the people. They've done this deliberately because they believe that David Hensley has caused the school board to lose its way. And yet, there is all kinds of tangible evidence that this reform-oriented school board has achieved many tangible and meaningful outcomes, which are improving the experiences of our public school students each and every day. Let me share them with you as we go out the door in this slightly abbreviated Liberty podcast. The school board, since let's call it 2021, has eliminated all F-rated schools as rated by the state. F-rated, we had 2. We had a bunch of Ds and some Cs. They're all gone, especially the Fs. $7 million was discovered as being excess and saved by doing some contract rebidding. There was $10 million tied up in contracts. They stripped away $7 million of that to spend instead only $3 million. Who was the chair of the finance committee when that happened? David Hensley, the only school board member who has a grip on budgeting and cost cutting. And if you don't think that's important, think again. They have replaced a failed Moore County Schools strategic plan with one that is focused on academic merit, vocational education, VOTEC, and citizenship, meaning learning what it means to be a solid American citizen who can contribute to society in adulthood. That's what it's all about. They have replaced ineffective or ideologically driven administrators with highly effective education-focused educators. How about that? All the wokes are a joke and they're gone. They hit the road. They've restored student discipline. Are you seeing the videos anymore of the bus fights and the other incidents on campus? The unchecked fighting and violence? Innocent students being beaten by bullies? You're not seeing that anymore, are you? No, you're not. Reinstated the recognition of valedictorians and salutatorians. Why not recognize excellence and teach students that they need to be aspiring to those kinds of students who are receiving this kind of recognition? Spindrift break. My favorite sparkling water. Spindrift. They've also gotten rid of inappropriate, illegal, and invasive student surveys. Remember those? Asking kids if they had suicidal thoughts. When's the last time they had sex? And they're asking, 7-year-olds. And 2 more. Passed a parental bill of rights. You know what that does? That keeps administrators and teachers out of the way of parents raising their children. And most importantly, it puts the brakes on this insidiousness of aiding and abetting children who want to gender transition unbeknownst to their parents. This is happening in public schools all over the country. It's not happening in Moore County, and it's not going to happen in the future. And last but not least, here's a simple one. They reinstated the spelling bee. You know why spelling bees were thrown out? Racist. If you can't spell, that's the fault of the systemic racist nature of our society. No, it's not. It's because you don't know how to hunker down and discipline yourself and learn how to spell. And the kids that are good at it, just like the kids that are good at debate and math and sports, should be celebrated for their work. They may have some natural abilities, but they work at it and they succeed and they become inspirations for their siblings and for other children. And even for adults, believe it or not. The children, the babes shall lead us, as they say. Well, this has been another rollicking episode of the Liberty Podcast. We're so glad you joined us. We hope you'll come back and do so again next week, right here. See you soon.